It was just after 9 p.m. on a cold November night in Cedar Falls, Ohio, when Mark Ellis clocked in for his shift at Building 47, an abandoned distribution warehouse sitting at the edge of the industrial park. The place hadn't been fully operational in years, and most of the nearby buildings had already been sold or demolished. Mark didn't mind the quiet. He'd worked security for over a decade and preferred silence to the chaos of city assignments. Building 47 was different, though. It wasn't just empty, it felt wrong. The warehouse stretched nearly 3 stories high, with a narrow basement running beneath it. The company that owned it still paid for overnight security because local teenagers liked to break in and dare each other to spend the night. At least, that's what they said. The previous guard, an older man named Ron, had quit 2 months ago. "Can't do it anymore," he told Mark over coffee one afternoon. "There's something off in that basement. You'll see what I mean." Ron wouldn't explain further. He just looked tired. Mark didn't believe in ghost stories, but after his first week there, he started to understand why someone might. That night, the wind outside was strong enough to shake the metal siding, making it sound like someone tapping from the other side of the wall. Mark sat in the security booth by the main entrance, sipping coffee and watching the 4 old CCTV monitors. One showed the parking lot, another the main floor, one the loading dock, and the last the basement corridor. At 9:37 p.m., the motion light in the basement flicked on. Mark leaned forward. The feed was grainy, black and white, and full of static, but for a second he thought he saw something, just a shadow moving past the far wall, like someone walking out of view. He waited, staring, but nothing else moved. The light went out again. He jotted the time in his logbook. He was used to false triggers, rats, power surges, sometimes just bad wiring. Still, the movement seemed too slow, too deliberate. At 10:15, he grabbed his flashlight and decided to make his first round. The main hall was silent except for the buzz of the old lights overhead. Dust hung in the air, stirred up by his boots. The temperature seemed to drop with each step. He moved past a row of broken pallets, checked the office doors, and then reached the stairwell leading to the basement. The sign on the door read, "Basement Access, Authorized Personnel Only." He unlocked it and started down. The air grew heavy and cold, carrying that unmistakable smell of damp concrete and rust. His flashlight beam cut across old machinery, broken shelves, and thick cobwebs. Then he froze. Something had been moved. One of the old pallets near the center of the basement was pushed aside. He remembered it sitting neatly against the wall earlier in the week. "Probably maintenance," he muttered under his breath. But when he checked his notes, there hadn't been a maintenance visit scheduled in over 2 months. He was about to turn back when he heard it, a soft, dragging sound coming from the far end of the basement, beyond the light's reach. It wasn't the shuffle of feet, it was slower. He called out, "Hey, this is private property. You need to come out now." No answer. He took a few cautious steps forward. The sound stopped. Then, just as he raised his flashlight higher, something moved behind a stack of crates. Quick, low, like someone ducking out of sight. Mark's pulse picked up. He shone the beam directly toward the movement. "I'm calling the cops," he warned. Still nothing. He walked closer, the sound of his boots echoing against the concrete. When he rounded the corner, there was no one there, only a small puddle of water from a leaking pipe. He exhaled, trying to laugh it off. "You're jumpy, man," he whispered. "Too much caffeine." He checked the perimeter once more, then went back upstairs. Back in the booth, he rewound the CCTV feed. The basement camera was still glitchy, lines flickering across the screen. He played back the last few minutes and nearly spilled his coffee. When he'd been in the basement, the camera had shown someone else standing behind him. It was faint, like a tall, pale shape near the crates, right where he'd heard the noise, but the figure vanished when the flashlight beam swung around. He stared at the monitor for a full minute before shaking his head. "Bad signal," he said to himself, but he didn't sound convinced. At 11:00 p.m., a gust of wind rattled the booth windows. Mark nearly jumped again. The temperature had dropped even more. He rubbed his hands and looked at the monitors. The basement light was on again. This time, he saw movement clearly. A figure walking slowly down the hall. It was tall, human-shaped, but something was wrong with the way it moved. The steps looked uneven, jerky, like it wasn't quite touching the ground. Mark grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Ellis at Building 47. I've got a possible intruder in the basement. I'm going to check it out." Static. He tried again, but all he got was crackling. His radio was dead. He took his flashlight and started toward the basement once more. The door to the stairwell was ajar when he got there. He was sure he'd locked it earlier. His stomach tightened. "Hello?" he called out. "This is security. You need to come out." No response. He went down the stairs, one hand gripping the rail. The flashlight flickered once, then steadied. The light at the far end of the basement was still on. He stepped onto the concrete floor, sweeping the beam left and right. Something scraped behind him. He spun around. Nothing. Then, faintly, he heard a voice, a whisper. It was so soft he could barely make out the words, but it sounded like someone saying his name. "Mark." He froze. He scanned the room again, the beam shaking slightly in his hand. The voice came again, a little louder, from the far corner. "Mark." It wasn't the tone of someone in distress. It was slow, deliberate, almost mocking. He backed away toward the stairs, his pulse hammering in his ears. "Who's there?" Something shifted in the shadows. A tall figure stepped into the edge of the light. It looked human. Broad shoulders, dark clothing, but its face wasn't right. The head tilted slightly to one side, and the features didn't move, didn't blink. Then the lights went out. The entire basement went black. Mark bolted up the stairs, tripping on the last step, slamming the door shut behind him. He fumbled for his phone, turned on the flashlight, and ran to the booth. He tried calling dispatch again, but there was no signal. The power to the building had cut out completely, even the emergency lights. He sat in the booth for several minutes, breathing heavily, listening to the silence. Then he noticed something on the window. Handprints. Fresh, wet handprints smeared across the outside of the glass. He stared at them, trying to think rationally. Maybe a prank? Maybe someone had followed him up. But when he turned on the booth's small backup light, he saw the prints were inside, not outside. At 11:48 p.m., he heard the basement door slam shut on its own. Mark didn't leave the booth until dawn. When the morning shift arrived at 6 a.m., he was pale, shaking, and silent. 2 days later, he returned to the site with a technician to repair the cameras. The man pointed at the screen connected to the basement feed. "That's weird," he said. "This camera isn't wired into the main system anymore. Power's been cut for months." Mark just stared at the monitor. Then how was it showing anything last night? The technician shrugged. "It wasn't. Must have been an old recording loop." But Mark knew it hadn't been a recording. He'd seen that thing move. He quit 2 weeks later. The security company sent another guard named Alex Pierce to take his place. Alex lasted one night. He told the supervisor that someone kept whispering his name through the intercom even though the system wasn't working. When he checked the logs, he noticed something chilling. Every time the intercom whispered his name, the timestamp matched exactly with when the basement motion sensor light turned on. The building has been vacant ever since. Local police claim it's just old wiring, temperature shifts, and paranoia from long shifts alone at night. But anyone who's worked the graveyard shift at Building 47 tells the same story. There's something in that basement, something that knows your name, that watches from the dark, waiting for you to come back. And it never forgets who's been there.